Hello and welcome to Scientific Supplement Reviews. In today's video, I will review the mineral-rich liquid known as cow's milk and its possible role in reducing the risk of bowel cancer, otherwise known as colorectal cancer. Specifically, I will present the exciting results from a brand new study published only a couple of days ago. This new study includes data from over 500,000 people and finds that milk consumption is associated with a significantly reduced risk of colorectal cancer. In particular, this protective effect of milk seems to stem from one specific ingredient, whose secret identity will be revealed in the course of this video. So let's get to it. Let's jump straight into this study I mentioned a moment ago. As you can see from the title, it is not actually a study that looks at milk consumption exclusively, but rather it sets out to investigate the effect of various aspects of our diets on colorectal cancer risk. For this cohort study, the authors used a database which holds the dietary and health records of over 500,000 UK women. Now, let's have a look at their findings. Here we have a so-called volcano plot, which shows the association of various dietary items with colorectal cancer risk. Each dot, some grey, some pink, represents a particular dietary item, such as alcohol consumption or fruit consumption, for example. Now, how do we interpret a graph such as this one? Well, to put it simply, the x-axis shows a measure of bowel cancer risk, and any dot that falls to the left of the number 1 on that scale is inversely associated with bowel cancer risk, meaning that cancer risk is reduced, and any dot that falls to the right of that number is associated with an increased risk of bowel cancer. On the y-axis, we have a measure of statistical significance, meaning that the higher up on that axis a point falls, the more confident we can be that any risk association we find with a dietary item really is a true association. Any dot that falls above the dotted grey line, the pink dots, has at least a 95% chance of being found to have a similar risk association in any future repeats of this study, and is thus considered by statistical tradition and consensus to be a real association. Alright, now, focusing on the pink dots, we can see some interesting and familiar food items and micronutrients. As is already well established, red and processed meat consumption, as well as alcohol consumption, fall to the right of the number 1 on the x-axis and are associated with a significantly increased risk of developing colorectal cancer. On the other side of that risk spectrum, we have the rather exciting observation that milk consumption, here at 200 grams per day, is inversely associated with bowel cancer risk, suggesting that it has a protective effect against the disease. So, the question then becomes, which one of the many macro and micronutrients contained in cow's milk may be driving this protective effect against bowel cancer? And to answer that question, we might be able to get some clues by looking at the other protective dietary items on this graph. Particularly noteworthy amongst these is calcium, an essential mineral found in milk and other dairy products, which boasts the most statistically significant association with reduced bowel cancer risk of all the nutrients and dietary items investigated in this study. Now, since calcium is a component of dairy milk, one may hypothesize that it is simply the calcium within the milk which drives the protective effect of milk against colorectal cancer. Interestingly, when the authors adjusted the effect of milk on bowel cancer risk for calcium, in other words, when they removed the influence of the calcium variable from the effect of milk, then the inverse association of dairy milk intake and cancer risk disappeared. This thus giving additional succor to the hypothesis that it is in fact the calcium in the milk that drives the latter's protective effect against bowel cancer. As a final test to help ascertain whether calcium is the milk's active ingredient, if you will, for its protective effect against colorectal cancer, the authors of the study applied a statistical method to the data, which allows one to test the inverse association of calcium intake to bowel cancer risk independent of milk intake, and vice versa. They report that calcium intake is protective against bowel cancer independent of milk intake, whereas milk independent of calcium is not. In conclusion, this recent cohort study finds that dairy milk has a protective effect against colorectal cancer, and that it is the calcium in the milk that exerts this protective effect. To get an idea of the scale of that protective effect, the authors calculate that a dose of 300 mg of calcium per day reduces the risk of bowel cancer by 17%, and 200 grams of milk per day, roughly equivalent to a volume of 200 milliliters, reduces the risk of the cancer by 14%. So, there you have it. I hope you have enjoyed this breaking news installment of Scientific Supplement Reviews. Please like and subscribe, follow me on Blue Sky, and let me know in the comments about any other supplements you would like me to review.